to Aaron's Not So Slightly Biased Character Analysis, Episode 1. This is a series where I talk about a character I know in a medium I enjoy, books, shows, movies, whatever, going over what I like and dislike about the character, and whether or not I like the character themselves. This series is probably not only going to include the characters I like, but also the ones I dislike. So you Final Space people will know what I mean when I say I am going to include Clarence in this one, but that does not mean I necessarily like him as a character. A disclaimer that I'm not a professional storyteller or writer, but I do text-based roleplay in my spare time, and I like to write out scenes that delve deep into a character's feelings and angst. I write angst. I like exploring feelings in psychology to understand why a character does what he does, and again, not a professional on either count. And this is pure speculation, so take my words as not as gospel, but more of an infodump for funsies. I will also add my personal headcanons and ones I've seen others laud closer to the end of the video. Okay? Okay, let's get into it while I draw today's character. This episode will contain spoilers for Season 1 of Final Space. I do suggest you watch the show itself, but for legal reasons I can't tell you where to watch it here. Just search around those Twitter/Facebook/fandom spaces and you may be able to find something. I mean, I frequent the Discord server of Final Space/Olanverse, and you could probably ask me there. Today's character is Gary Goodspeed from my personal favorite adult cartoon, Final Space, which I have already mentioned in this video several times. Final Space is currently a 3-season television series created by Ghost in the Stalls legend Olan Rogers. The show itself was cancelled after Season 3 on the All Is Lost story beat, with a cliffhanger best described as the cannibal roller coaster at Lagoon if that drop of 116 degrees past freefall dropped into an eldritch void. This cancellation was a horrible decision on Warner Brothers' part, in my humble cartoon watching opinion, but the story has since been greenlit for a graphic novel that Olan is planning to use to conclude the story. I've already pre-ordered my copy, and I'll leave the link to pre-order your own in the description below. For this video, I'll only be covering key story beats and character development for Season 1. And it's not really going to be copacetic at all, it's just, again, infodumping, and probably not structured at all. I wrote the script, and it doesn't seem structured, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. At the beginning of the show, Gary is a 32-year-old convict sentenced to 5 years of deep space community service, end quotes, mainly repairing satellites and stuff, and social isolation. Carrying out his sentence and acting as prison warden is Hugh. If anybody knows what that acronym stands for, please let me know in the comments. And he's got a squad of SAMEs, or robots, to act as security, and another more spherical, more annoying robot called Kevin, who refers to himself as Gary's insanity avoidance companion, and later on in the season, Gary's best friend. Each episode of the season, except the season finale, has a cold open that's set sort of like one of those prologues in books that start somewhere near the middle or end of the story. And it's beautifully done, in my opinion, because we get a small snippet of Gary's character growth before we even officially meet him. Throughout the season, Gary is consistently, and this is where I relate strongly to him, very loud, what most people would call obnoxious, constantly cracking jokes no matter the gravity of the situation, and very childish. So, again, relatable. The timeline of Gary's life in this season goes from a short flashback scene, several years before the events of the show, where his father, John Goodspeed, gives him a gift before going on a mission that proves fatal, to when Gary has a final showdown with the antagonist and ends up in the situation we see in every episode's cold open. Again, except the last episode. But really, the important part to remember is that Gary grew the rest of the way up without parents. We don't really know what age Gary was when his father died, however, certain out-of-show facts point to a couple things. The first and objectively more painful thing is that Olan Rogers himself confirmed that all Final Space characters share their voice actor's birthday. Olan voices both Gary and Mooncake, who is a small green alien that is later confirmed to have been created at the moment of Gary's father's death. Meaning, Mooncake's birthday is the day John died. And since Mooncake and Gary share a birthday, this means that he lost his father on his birthday. I project his age to be early teens at the point his father dies, and while this is later discussed in season 2, also lost his mother around the same time, maybe like a couple weeks later, when she ran off without him. Speaking of Cheryl, just a side note, because in the Final Space fandom, there is one person I ran into across multiple social media sites. I will not tolerate literal paragraphs spewing hate and vitriol about Cheryl Goodspeed. You know who you are. It's okay to hate a character, and even valid in Cheryl's case. She's kind of a shit person who will have her own episode later on. I relate to Gary in another way because his mother is shit, and my mother is shit. So, trust me when I say, I agree. But there's a difference between hating a character and letting it influence literally every conversation you have, poisoning every conversation you have with any member of the Final Space fandom. And if you are in the Olanverse Discord server, you will know this person, and you will be just as annoyed as I am. So if you're about to write a wall of text where every first letter is capitalized in every word, just about how much you hate Cheryl Goodspeed, and just how much worse of a parent she is than Endeavor from My Hero Academia for some godforsaken reason, do us all a favor and just don't. Or else Cheryl gets 5 videos. Where was I? Oh yeah. So basically, this kid grows from his early teens into adulthood with no parents, resulting in the first flashback we see in episode 1. If you don't count the rest of the season as a flashback, considering the future set cold opens, but for the sake of not turning this into Kingdom Hearts, I'll just disregard that part of the chronology for a moment. The first flashback is to set the tone of his relationship with Quinn, a member of the Infinity Guard who rightfully turns down his advances. As someone who grew up female and lived as a woman before, egg cracking happened, I'm on Quinn's side here. Gary doesn't initially take no as an answer. Granted, I'd be more likely to pay attention to Gary because his first words to her are frankly hilarious. See, I like that. I like a girl with a lot of phones. Anyway, he meshes with my own sense of humor. But I'm not like most girls. Mainly because of the whole not being cis thing, but I digress. Quinn is a no-nonsense, work-focused lady, and I stand. I may even simp a little. She is well within her rights to turn him down, but honestly, I didn't bring this flashback up just for Quinn. Let's get into the other stuff we see in the background. It starts with Gary running from 2 people, referred to as Dr. Bluestein and Derek, holding what appears to be a glowing diamond. In a fanfic I tried to write that has since stagnated with 3 whole chapters, it got really pretty sluggish to write. I called this an ionic zirconia because, this whole trope of put a sci-fi word in front of a regular word to make it sound more sci-fi. Thanks Rick and Morty for that call out. There is a note of familiarity when Dr. Bluestein threatens Gary in this scene, meaning these guys know each other, probably more than we see on screen. I think I see them in a flashback where Mooncake the First is that's a spoiler for season 2, but anyway, I think I see him in a previous flashback, but I need to rewatch that episode, honestly. I'm not sure how much of this is my own headcanon and how much of it has been confirmed off-screen, but considering there's a years-long gap between, simply keeping this to season 1, Gary watching his dad explode as a young teen, and Gary apparently stealing this ionic zirconia, I'd say it's a high probability that I'm right, and Gary moved from his old digs in what I'm assuming is Florida, considering that's where most space launches tend to happen, to New York City. And we know it's New York City because in episode 9 they go to New York and happen upon the bar that Gary and Quinn had this fateful meeting. Going by math, Gary is around the 26 to 27-year-old age range in this flashback, depending on which month it's set, meaning he's spent at least a decade between when he was virtually orphaned and when he was arrested for being a dumbass and destroying almost 100 government spacecraft at a Mexican restaurant. And let's be honest, no matter how mediocre Gary calls it, the bigger crime is definitely the destruction of the restaurant. Considering this is around the time the Lord Commander would presumably be actively corrupting the Infinity Guard and doing evil shenaniganery, Gary destroying a bunch of crap that the Infinity Guard used probably threw a wrench into said evil shenaniganery, meaning it was kind of a good thing. And even mediocre tacos are better than a bowl of that corruption stew. So far we have a child that experienced something traumatic at a young age, lived on his own and possibly on the streets for at least a decade, and was sentenced to a measly 5 years of prison in deep space away from a society that never loved him anyway. I've read somewhere that Gary was given such a light sentence because his father had died literally saving the world, so world hero thing. But honestly, the Infinity Guard should have done much better in taking care of him, like sending him a godfather, something, anything. I think there's a headcanon that the Lord Commander was supposed to be his godfather. But you know, the whole turning evil thing kind of threw a wrench in that too. So many wrenches, lots of wrenches being thrown. We see later on that in this particular timeline, things go way more favorably in saving the universe than in the previous timelines, which I think is partially due to the other person taking the bomb into the breach, and also partially to do with the fact that Gary is not an Infinity Guard member in this timeline, but is a convict. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So there's this guy that grew up alone in what amounts to a sentence of social isolation, and if you've seen any documentaries on social isolation, you know what that does to a person. Even one seen by society as deserving of it, it's pretty horrible. And then you see him next going about the ship, almost despondently. Like 5 years later, he's walking on the treadmill. In the shower, he just basically stands there while the water's going. He watches the windows of the ship as fantastic spacescapes go by, letting his coffee dribble out on the floor. I don't know about you, but waste of coffee is absolutely heartbreaking. The rest of the ship is sparkling clean, but his room is messy. I've been there. Classic depression. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a psychologist, but there is a certain level of apathy you get when grieving the loss of a loved one, no matter how belatedly. One that numbs your fingers, leaves you staring into space, figuratively, or in this case, literally. Heh, 'cause space, get it? There are several times throughout the series where Gary makes jokes that either allude to him taking himself off the census, or explicitly stating it. There's a moment in episode 9 where he's reiterating how much he hates Kevin, but is also rubbing his temple with the business end of a blaster. Trigger discipline is important, friends, and don't point the business end of a blaster to your temple. Ah! I will also state that I believe Gary, whether it's purposely written that way or not, is on the autism spectrum. Some examples include his stimming and hyperfixation, which is dancing. Yes, I'm counting that as both. There's also clear masking. You see him in those opening shots, the treadmill, the coffee, that poor freaking coffee. He's not mentally well, he's depressed. Yet every time he interacts with anyone, a human, a Ventrexian, any alien, any robot, even Hugh, there's no sign of it. He's cracking jokes. He cries, but mainly in a comical manner, as if trying to make a joke of him crying. Episode 7, he just lost a friend. The opening shot is him very seriously talking to the spirit of his dead friend into a camera on which he's recorded his feelings for 5 years. I miss you, friend. There's no jokes. He's actually asking his friend to flicker the lights to let him know he's there. But later on, when he's reminded again of his friend's passing, he's in front of that friend's child. He very loudly and comically, while still blubbering from grief, shouts, "My bro is dead!" He's still displaying grief, but trying to be funny about it for the benefit of his companions. Again, I've been there. I know how he's feeling, and it is not that he wants to be funny, it's that he doesn't want everyone else to be sad. So he's masking his cold, apathetic grief with a warm, kinda wet grief. Ugh. Still allowing himself to feel, but not the way he probably should be. And now I'm making myself cry, so I'm gonna get on to my next point. Found family. It's a trope you love to see. From Geralt, Yennefer, Jaskier, and Ciri in The Witcher, of which I've only watched the show, I haven't actually read the books, I haven't played the games, but to IMP in Hell of a Boss, to literally everyone Steven breathes a word in the direction of in Steven Universe. For those of us with either no family of our own or issues that result in no contact policies, it can be cathartic for us to see our favorite characters hoard new friends and treat them like siblings, parents, even their own children, like the best kind of dragon. Gary, in turn, has a charisma that draws people in. We see that in Avocado, who probably initially took Gary as some kind of dumbass with no power of self-preservation, and he's not wrong. And even though he was initially using Gary to get to the Lord Commander and probably trying to take advantage of Gary's trusting nature to get Mooncake to the enemy, they ended up fast friends with the best kind of best friend chemistry. And as much as I indulge in fandom-wide shipping, and Gary Kato is one of my favorites right under Polyspace because Gary has two hands for both Quinn and Avocado, gosh dang it. In canon, their relationship was a brotherhood, and honestly, it would kind of cheapen that a little bit if it turned into a canon ship. So I'm appreciating the way this is going. Mooncake, an orbular alien who is the show's mascot, is the first living being Gary meets after years of being alone. His first hug since his father died. No, I'm not counting Kevin. His first friend since probably ever, since I don't know if he felt comfortable being friends with anyone in New York City, and I wouldn't. Mooncake symbolizes Gary's father in ways that Gary doesn't quite understand yet, but at first simply because something about his color and shape probably reminds him of that last gift John gave him, the caterpillar that was the first Mooncake. Technically, considering how Mooncake was created, he is John's true last gift to Gary, one more friend whom he can take on bunches and bunches of adventures, and I'm gonna cry again. Quinn, who initially met Gary while he was being a lying F-boy at a bar, eventually came to see how genuine Gary actually was, when he was actually being himself. Whether or not their relationship started on rocky terms or was quote-unquote forced, as I've heard people say, and I will say that's also kind of valid as well, but I think that's more on the pacing of the show and deadlines and decisions that the writers had to follow, seems a little bit pushed by Nightfall, Quinn's future timeline alternate. You can't deny that whether dating or not, Gary and Quinn have really good chemistry. I don't know if dating someone counts as found family, but I'm sticking it here anyway because it's adorable. And then there's little Kato. Small bean, precious baby boy, the fandom's sweet summer child that can literally do no wrong but has had so much crap thrown in his face. Even before that infamous episode in Season 2, Gary has done nothing but try to be a fatherly figure to little Kato since he knew he existed. I mean, the whole, I don't know why more kids aren't named Death is Sweeter Than Life. Come on. For Gary, who lost his father at a young age and had to deal with it alone, he sees himself in little Kato after the events of episode 6 that Olan keeps torturing us with. Please continue to torture us, but holy jeez, Olan, turn it down a little sometimes. Gary sees little Kato as a kindred spirit, pretty close to the age Gary was in that first Dadsplosion. Yes, I said Dadsplosion. Yes, there's a kitty. Hi, kitty. He doesn't want little Kato to go through what he did. So, what does he do? I think everyone who's seen The Lost Spy, no, not the B plot, we don't talk about the B plot, knows that Gary adopted little Kato a long-ass time ago. And now we get to the anxiety and the chamber of doubt. In search of answers on how to save the world, or actually universe, without losing his friends, Gary goes to visit a titan called Bolo. It's here that Mooncake finds out about his quote-unquote birth, that little Kato realizes just how similar he and Gary are, because of the aforementioned dad-splosions, and that Quinn realizes how genuine Gary is about his feelings for her. It's also here that Gary gets some closure with his father, John Goodspeed. But first, the chamber. It's here that he admits his anxiety about the situation, and to rehash a word I keep using in this video, his fears are valid. Honestly, the chances of success for this mission is slim at best. They're a team of a handful of ragtag sci-fi rebels against the whole of the Infinity Guard, which is effectively the Earth government / space force, the Lord Commander, and his army. There's a literal child on their team, a metaphorical one if you count Gary. Their odds don't look good. But he wasn't admitting to that in his morale-boosting speech with the team squad. He was admitting that to himself, to a mirror or a camera, and to Hugh, but not to the others. Masking your emotions can make you an effective leader, in my opinion, but there are points where you have to let yourself feel. It's hard to do that when you're also trying to keep up the morale of your team, going into a situation you're all pretty sure is hopeless. But Gary's charisma at least seems to keep everyone from despairing, except himself. He goes into Bolo's chamber of doubt and is poked into admitting that he's scared that there's no way of winning, that he might lose all of the friends he managed to accrue. Admitting that is actually healthy in my opinion. But then he's face to face with his father, his actual father, not a caterpillar with his voice, not a memory, not a figment. Bolo shoots him back in time, roundabouts 19 years, to see his father and help him close the breach in his time. And I think that is probably the most important scene in the show, because it's Gary being himself with his father one last time. It's his father telling them that he has what it takes, and even if he doesn't succeed, if he tries and fails, quote, "it's good enough for me," unquote. Words that Gary's been needing to hear all his life, but never could. So while he did have to watch the dad-splosion all over again, he also got loving approval from his favorite person in the world. He got his closure for the shard of glass that's been embedded in his heart for nearly 2 decades. So, I don't know if my admittedly scripted infodump rambling is making any sense to anyone, but here's a summary so far of what I'm saying. Gary Goodspeed is a broken man whose biggest fear is being alone. A man who masks his depression to put on a brave comic relief face to the people he cares about. A dragon in human form who hoards friends, even robotic ones, because no matter how much he hates Kevin, at least he's there to talk to or, well, yell at. And when he realizes what he has, he'll stop at nothing to keep them together. He hears about a breach in space, threatening a home that rejected him, and drops everything to go save it. He leads his found family into battle against an annoyingly power-thirsty imp who needs to be turned into a plethora of buttholes. And at the end of the season, we see him fail and end up almost alone, because there's one more person we haven't really talked about. Hugh. Hugh was done freaking dirty in Season 2. Luckily, we're not yet talking about Season 2. Hugh has seen Gary through these 5 years of prison, and in the span of a few episodes disconnects with the Infinity Guard network who put him in charge of Gary in the first place. And even though Gary references not having seen a life form in 5 years, meaning in all that time Hugh has not seen fit to let him off the ship, it doesn't take much for him to let Gary go with Avocado in episode freaking 2. He's a strict prison warden, but with his own sense of humor despite being an artificial intelligence. A real artificial intelligence, not a crappy plagiarism software. If you support things like Midjourney, stop watching my channel and rethink your life. You can't support real artists while also supporting software that harms us. Hugh has seen Gary grow through all this and realizes in that last moment when Gary's blasted into space with dwindling oxygen and no clear path to survival that he's alone. So despite knowing that talking expends oxygen faster, despite knowing that Gary is literally 10 minutes from asphyxiating with no friends and no home and no rescue coming, Hugh stays with him, talking to him and making him feel just a little bit better about his predicament. Even though Hugh knows that if Gary dies, Hugh will be reduced to a voice in a helmet floating in space for the foreseeable future, rendering him even more alone than Gary ever was. Not like he has much choice aside from just, powering down forever, but at least he's waiting it out with Gary before he decides to do that. And lastly, we get to what is probably my favorite plot device in the entire show. Gary's love for cookies. Didn't expect that, did you? Or maybe you did because it's maybe a little obvious. Cookies in Final Space are not simply cookies. They're a symbol. Something those of us who grew up with parents probably take for granted. Something usually attributed to a matronly figure, a nostalgic time in our childhood, or a symbol of childhood itself. Something tells me it's been a long time since Gary has had a cookie. I think, and this is probably a little bit of speculation and spitballing, that cookies in Final Space represent Gary's wish to return to a simpler time, when he had someone to take care of him and make him cookies. He tries to get a cookie in one of the first scenes of the show. That attempt is denied. And then the cookie is offered. And then the offer is revoked when he displays a quality trait that Hugh has not seen displayed in him previously. He gorges himself on cookies shortly before he's offered a choice to leave the mission or see it through. He's denied a cookie in a cold open, hi Athena, because to eat it would kill him. He's kind of offered a cookie near the end of the season when he says, "I'm not running away." Maybe at one point that made sense, but I'm not that guy anymore. Take a shot every time I say cookie, but make a shot of water because y'all need to stay hydrated, yo. Gary being denied cookies constantly through the show is basically the universe telling him he needs to grow up. And trust me, there is a heartbreaking scene in Season 3 regarding cookies that I will definitely go over in regards to this. He was denied his childhood when he was living it, and he's constantly being denied it even as an adult. But I don't want to end on such a depressing note, so here are some headcanons I personally like. See, I say they're headcanons. That does not mean I think anyone's wrong for disagreeing with me. The beauty of headcanons in a fandom is that we can all be right no matter how wrong we are in the eyes of the source material. A kind of Schrodinger's canon. Okay, first headcanon, he can't cook. He certainly tries and he can make a passable cookie, but if you try to get him to do anything more complicated than a hamburger helper, it's either going to be bland as hell or over-seasoned. Headcanon number 2. He has done drugs. He lived on the streets of New York City. There's no way he went that long without a bowl of the devil's lettuce. When he took, quote, free candy, unquote, from a stranger on an alien planet, he knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe not necessarily how it would affect him, but I'm pretty sure he knew it wasn't candy. Headcanon 3. He is autistic. He's at the very least unintentionally coded as autistic, if you pay attention to canon. And headcanon 4, probably the one that's closest to my heart. He is AFAB, or assigned female at birth, trans, and bisexual. He refers to a man as handsome in Season 2, not necessarily non-straight, as I'm not saying a straight man can't call his homies handsome, but still, there's kind of a stigma about doing that unless you have some affection for the same sex. I'm just saying. There's a moment in one of Gary's flashbacks where John enunciates the word boy as if to validate someone who recently came out to him. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with my analysis? Are there headcanons I should include in the next Gary analysis? Because there will be one for every episode. And probably more because I don't think I covered everything I wanted to here. Which character should I cover next? Is my info dump even coherent? Does it matter how coherent it is? Bye, Athena. Like and subscribe for more content. I'm planning on doing way more analyses for more characters, shows, books, etc. in the future, so stay tuned. I'm thinking Nico D'Angelo from Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I'm thinking Edward Elric from Fullmetal Alchemist. I'm thinking a lot of crap. I don't know. Maybe I'll do audiobooks too. I don't know. For now, I don't know. And I'll see you on the next one. Aaron out.